Welcome to Occam's Razor. I went out to vote today. And guess whose name wasn't on the voter roll? Mine. That's right. After being in this country for 60 years, having voted in every federal election, having just been released from the Canadian Armed Forces, somehow my name was missing from the voter roll. Well, I guess it happens, but it's strange. It's not the first time they said they've heard this. In fact, one of the persons at the poll who was trying to resolve this issue for me asked me if I was ex-military, which I said yes. And they said, were you high up there? And I wouldn't consider myself high up there, but I was in a senior position in a senior appointment. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think it's just the fact that as soon as you're released from the Canadian Armed Forces, you get removed from the voter roll. I think it's just another foxtrot uniform to the Canadian Armed Forces members when they leave by this government, because we're just there to be used and abused. Now, if you're going out to vote at the advanced polls this weekend and you forgot your wallet, you forgot your ID, no problem. In fact, you can show up and not have any ID at all. So as you can see right here, you don't need ID. You can still vote if you declare your identity and address in writing and have someone who knows you, who is assigned to your polling station, vote for you. That's right. You can just have somebody else show up who's got valid ID and they can vouch for you and say, hey, this person is a real citizen. They're allowed to vote. These are the recent changes that have been done in a bill that was passed. Bill C-67, also known as the Elections Modernization Act, has changed the way we vote, which has included these new changes. They did do some changes for the military members because in the past we had to fill out paperwork in the orderly room, and no matter where we were on the planet or where we would get posted throughout our career, if we wanted to continue voting in our home riding, we could do that. I don't know if this ability is still available now that the voting has been modernized, but apparently there's more options. In fact, the ultimate option is that you get to re-register again, even if you've been in this country for 60 years. Now, while we're on the topic of the military, it's a good time to revise when you're coming up and voting to, if you're a military supporter, maybe you should look and see what the Liberals have planned for the military for the next 10 years after they destroyed it for the past 10 years. What do they have planned? Let's see. Expand the capabilities of the Navy with new submarines and additional heavy icebreakers to defend the North. To which we say, where you been for the last 9 years? Right? That submarines in Canada have been a bloody joke. Ever since that fiasco with buying those diesel subs, those used diesel subs from the UK to replace our old diesel subs, I, the submarine service deserves better. Not that you're going to get too many seamen joining the submarine service anymore. Should tell that story I heard in the mess one day about how a person joined the military. I'm going to tell the story now. So I'm in the mess. This is back in the 90s, and it's after a course that we did during the day. We were doing some liquid penetration inspection, non-destructive testing course, and there was a couple of submariners on the course. And I, of course, asked him, how did you end up joining that service? At the time, I was in tactical helicopter squadron. And he said he started off like any other person in the Navy, serving on a ship, which is what he trained to be on. He was an engineer, uh, basically working on the engines in the plane, the actual stoker. And they said, well, maybe perhaps you'd like to go do an interview to join the submarine service. And he was like, he did not want to join that submarine service at all. He was like, screw that. So they give him a test to fill out. And he fills out all these questions. And every question that was in there, he tried to fill it out wrong. You know, have you ever had intimate relations with your mother? He wrote down yes. He was not getting on that submarine. So he goes into the office where they review his interview, and the officer behind the desk looked at all his answers, as screwed up as they were, and he looked at him and he said, "You know what, son? You're perfect." And so he became a submariner, and to which he became a deep sea diver, working on those turbine engines, spec 2 pay, sub pay, sea pay, all kinds of pay. But at the time on the course in his early 30s, he was like, I don't know if I'm going to live past 40 for all the damage that the military service has done to me with the constant effects of the bends from underwater welding and deep diving. And well, anyway, that's that story. And back then, that was before we bought those UK subs. I can't imagine he stayed in the service much longer after they got those. Fully commit to all orders underway through National Shipbuilding Strategy, where 21,400 jobs across the country and thousands of jobs for Irving Shipbuilding have been supported by the strategy through the construction of 8 Arctic and offshore patrol ships and 15 River-class destroyers. Truthfully, shipbuilding in Canada has been ongoing for decades, and projects like this take years to get a contract in, years to complete, and years to deliver. The fact that they're putting this on their page, if you go back far enough, this project was probably started by the last Conservative government. We will work with all Canada's shipyards to ensure that we are maximizing the abilities and using Canadian steel and aluminum. That's nice. You know, in the end, when you're building something, you don't really care where you get the materials, as long as it's cheap, because in the end, you want to get your best bang for the buck. Oh, wait, sorry, I'm talking about the liberals. They just they don't care about what they spend. They love spending other people's money, and they love not having any accountability, which goes into all these promises. We will expand and reach and we will expand the reach and abilities of Canadian Coast Guard and integrate them into our NATO defense capabilities. Our Coast Guard. Our Coast Guard, for years, been abandoned by Canadian governments. This one and all the preceding ones. I remember back when they first decided to increase the tax on cigarettes, and cigarettes got expensive, so cigarettes started being smuggled. In fact, a lot of things started being smuggled across the St. Lawrence. And the only troll ships that we had in the St. Lawrence were the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard couldn't defend themselves. The Coast Guard don't have any weapons. They couldn't even stop border intrusions because they didn't have any weapons. At least the US Coast Guard at least has a 50 cal mounted on their boats. Ours, nothing. Nothing at all. In fact, they would get shot at, and our Coast Guard would have to, stop, or I'll say, stop again. Fill the Canadian Forces shortage of 14,500 members by modernizing our recruitment process, giving all our CAF members a well-deserved raise, building new on-base housing, and improving access to doctors, mental health services, and childcare. Wow, really? So the Liberals had to reduce the entrance requirements, and they're still not getting a lot of recruits. In fact, they have non-citizens being allowed to join the Canadian Armed Forces. That's how attractive it is. Currently, I've said this story before on this podcast, but when I retired as a Spec 1 warrant officer, I was making about the same money as somebody who does a 1-year college course to fix furnaces. That's after 38 years in the forces. So you want to talk about pay issues? It's not just this government. Every other government prior has not really kept up. Now, mind you, there are certain things in the military, and this is what they do. They will look at what you get paid, and they would look at what is provided compared to the civilian world. So, of course, in the military, they know right away that you should have access much quicker to medical, and we do get to the front of the line sometimes, and we still have to wait at times, but we get a little faster treatment. I can attest to that, having left the military. Yeah, it's not the same. We uh, we do have some other things we don't have to worry about, like our work clothes, right? We're told what to wear every day. But in the civilian world, you have to buy your own equipment. Now, mind you, you can claim that on your taxes, but obviously not in the military. But then again, you're on duty 365, 24 hours a day. I know they don't do that, but technically they are, right? If you're in the military, you fall under two sets of rules, National Defense Act. Doesn't matter if you're on your time off, you're still considered under that act. Building new on-base housing. I've seen base housing just decline steadily since the 80s. There's been hardly any new base housing included or created. In fact, they've probably torn down more base housing than they've actually built over the past 40 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. And it's really a pity. It really is. Because Canadian Armed Forces members were expected to be moved around every 3 to 5 years during their career. And in some cases, you have to. You get promoted up in rank. You should not be hanging out in the same unit. And if you're from a small base or you're specifically in a small trade, they will have to move you to another unit. There's not going to be another unit on the base. Or, if they're really stuck, they'll keep you there. Really all depends on the career manager or your senior career officer for you commanders out there. But every time you move a Canadian Armed Forces member, they have to sell their house. You got to pay for their move. They got to buy another house at the end. You're paying for all these transaction fees, these cancellation fees for the bank. It's a lot of money. It is. It really is a lot of money. It'd be a lot better if some cases where people could pick one area and stay there for 10 years. The scale has moved back and forth in the Canadian Forces for this. I remember back in 1984, I'd been in the forces for about 10 years. I was now in TACL. I'd spent 4 years in TACL, and at this time, I was thinking, having been ex-infantry, this is still camping, the most disorganized camping I've been on, and I think maybe it might be time to go out and see what the real Air Force is about instead of just fixing helicopters. And luckily, at the time, they had just decided they were like, well, if we're going to put you on an aircraft type, I think we're going to keep you on that type for 10 years because we're realizing now that it's getting expensive to retrain people on new aircraft types all the time. To which I shot up my hand right away. I'm like, excuse me, does this mean I'm stuck in TACL for like 10 years as I was approaching the end of my fourth year? And they said, yep, probably right. It's like, oh, damn. And then within a couple of months, we were suddenly overborne in my trade by one person, and I lucked out and got posted to Trenton. So when you're talking about building new online base housing, there I was leaving Petawawa, going to Trenton, and not having any base housing to go to. In fact, there was a waiting list. So every time you move somebody now in the Canadian Armed Forces, they're going to look at the base housing, they're going to look at the waiting list, they're going to see it's a couple of years. Then they're going to go there on imposed restriction, leaving their family behind, hopefully until they get on a list. Then a year goes by, and they have to ask to get imposed restricted later, unless they change the rules on that again. And then, of course, you're away from your family, which causes more stress. It's not a good plan all around. You guys want to fix housing? That's a nice thing. But you destroyed the housing overall for all Canadians by importing mass immigration unvetted for when there wasn't a supply, let alone in social services, let alone for homes. I know, Liberals. We know you did this on purpose, and you've ignored the Canadian Armed Forces for 10 years. You've ignored them. Now you're just coming up with this plan? Pshaw, nobody believes you. Come on. Improving access to doctors, mental health services, and childcare. Well, in my last couple of years, we were losing doctors left and right. In fact, this has been the progression of the Canadian Armed Forces medical system since I joined in 1984. Back in 1984, we used to have uh, a medical center in Ottawa that administered to veterans and all Canadian Forces members across Canada. We would go for appointments in Ottawa, National Defense Medical Center, and DMC, and they would take care of us. I think that facility is long gone now. All the bases, their medical infirmary rooms, also known as the base hospital, they used to be open 24 hours a day. And then over the years, they ended up shutting down in the evenings because it's not that they didn't have a doctor, it's just they didn't have the personnel to operate it. And then they shut down over the weekends. Now they're just available throughout the week. And then, as they're there throughout the week, you'd be lucky if you can even get a doctor during the day. Most often, you're just going to see a nurse practitioner. Again, if you're lucky. And as for mental health, the Canadian Forces has done a really bad job of mental health, especially since the COVID stupidity. In fact, the level of abuse that they put the members through, um, a lot of them probably aren't going to recover very well from mental health. So I don't think we need to go through the rest of the list because right now, the number one mental health issue with Canadian Armed Forces members is the fact that they're trying to figure out how they are going to keep working for an employer that coerced its members into the COVIDity stupidity jibby jab to keep their employment. Now, up to 3 shots, mind you, they have to take, if they're in, they've had 3 shots that they've had to do if they want to be on career courses, if they want to go on operations, if they want to get posted, move on in their career. They got to take those 3 shots. And if they take them and they get injured, well, Veterans Affairs has said, oh, that's not work related. We're not going to help you. And in the Canadian Armed Forces, people that are suffering from these jibby jab injuries can't get the doctors to fill out the paperwork for them to say that it's an injury. So why? Why would you even go through the rest of this list, regardless of, the Liberals did that. This is their list. And the next government that will be formed, if it is the Conservatives, they have said squat. They have said nothing, absolutely nothing about these vaccine injuries and those who've been unalived by it. And the fact that they have been abandoned by this government, abandoned by Canada, and abandoned by the Canadian Armed Forces. So, if you're going to go and vote today, and you're voting in support of the Canadian Armed Forces, right now, neither party is really supporting forces or dealing with the elephant in the room, which is making a lot of people in the forces wondering why they should continue to pledge allegiance to a country that forced them to take a medical treatment and then abandoned them after they got injured. This has been Occam's Razor. Thanks for hanging out to the end. Like, share, subscribe. See you later.